Okay, good afternoon and welcome to Speaking. I am your host, SoSo Latrice, and I am here with my dear friend, mentor, and tutor, Robert Kidd. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Okay, so Robert, first, thank you for accepting my invite to do this interview. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to have you here or
Well,
there.
thank you. I mean, it's a real pleasure. We've known each other for years,
Yeah.
and I'm really excited about getting this opportunity to talk again.
Okay, so we're just gonna go right into it. So basically, kind of tell us something interesting about you that maybe I don't know or people don't know.
Okay, well, I think one thing that probably most people either don't know or wouldn't guess about me is that I live in the middle of the American Southwest, and for about 10 years, I played and refereed organizational ice hockey.
Oh,
And
really?
so I think that's something that most people wouldn't really associate with living in the desert Southwest. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it does exist. And so,
Wait, how did you get ice hockey in the desert?
well, we do have some rinks here. There's one in Albuquerque where I live. There's
Hmm.
one in Santa Fe and a couple others. And my wife actually started figure skating. And
Oh.
so I could spend time with her. I started just learning how to skate. And eventually I decided I'd try to take up hockey and did. And then I decided I'd want to try to learn how to ref for a little bit. And it was really a different experience, but I really enjoyed it.
So why didn't you keep up with it? Or do you still do it sometimes?
No, not so much. I think in part I got busier, and everybody else, the other players around me, were getting younger and faster, and I
Hmm.
wasn't. So, but it was a
Couldn't
lot
keep
of
up.
fun.
So, now tell us about you now. Like, what do you do? What's going on with you? So, a little bio.
Sure. Well, my background is as an attorney. I've been an attorney now for about 30 years. But for about the past 8 years or so, I've kind of been doing something a little different. And my title is an ethics and compliance officer. And I work for Bernalillo County, which is the largest county population wise in New Mexico. And
Mm,
so a lot of my work focuses on doing trainings and addressing questions regarding ethical decision making in our work. And my kind of position is more common in the private sector than in government. But I think right now, the discussions at all levels of government, local, state, national, have had an increase in focus on ethics and integrity and what that really means,
mm,
especially given that we're all publicly funded agencies.
right.
We rely on those taxpayer dollars, and with that comes a set of expectations. So a lot of my work is not only are we meeting the, say, legal or the regulatory requirements, but are we doing things in a way that is ethical and justifies the public's trust and confidence in us?
Is it something like, as far as like you can say like in the hospital setting where like they talk about like kickbacks from like doctors and insurance companies and things like that? Is that like in reference?
Sure. I mean, that would be a part of it. I mean, things like corruption, bribery, the classic line is fraud, waste, and abuse. But it's in other areas too, like how do we award contracts? Is it done in a fair and impartial manner? And what are our hiring practices? Are we making sure that we're free of conflicts of interest and nepotism? And are people not using their positions, especially elected positions, to abuse their authority and to try to either get or give special treatment to people? So it kind of covers a lot of the behavioral expectations that people have of government workers.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a big job.
I see. So, what's one thing that you wish you've known when you began your career?
Um, One thing I think I wish I'd known was that it's okay to change your path. That when I first started practicing 30 years ago, I had a sort of singular idea of what my career was going to be. And now, 30 years later, it's turned out to be something entirely different, but not something I regret. And so I guess just having the openness to be flexible and to um, change your mind or change your environment, because and it's interesting because I mentioned I work in ethics, organizational ethics now, and as an undergraduate I was a philosophy major, and most people would say, well, what are you going to do with that degree unless you're going to teach or
Right,
something like
right.
that. But now it's all kind of come full circle, so I can use all of those things I read and studied on as an undergraduate and apply it to my work three
Mm.
decades later.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Very interesting. You got some hard
Yeah, it's well, like I say, I think right now, if probably no more than any other point in my career, I think government agencies are at the highest level of scrutiny that they've ever
Mm-hmm.
been subjected to. And I think that is due not only to the pandemic, but I think due to the heightened and increased awareness and conversations with regards to racial and social injustice in this country and around the
Yes.
world. And all of these are factors. The elections, the events of January, even the tragic events we've seen over the past couple of weeks in different areas throughout this country. I think more, like I say, more than ever, people are watching what our government leaders are doing.
Oh yeah, and to, even just to piggyback off what you said, as far as even with this trial that's going on now with the George Floyd um, trial or whatever, it always it's crazy to me how I was hearing the judge tell the jury to like really take their time in their decisions, and even with them having a recording, do you think that it was almost like he was telling them like, I don't know. I kind of got like a questionable thing with the judge, like saying like, "Oh, take your time, make sure you look at all the evidence." But the recording is there, so like, is the recording? That's what I wanted to ask. Like, are the recordings strong evidence in cases?
Well, I think they certainly can be. And let me just tell you, because we here in Albuquerque, we've had some high profile police shooting cases, and there has been body camera footage of them and so forth. And where the arguments really tend to lie are, first of all, the length and the context and the background of the interaction. Because what we see in the popular media is usually just a 1 or 2 minute clip, maybe. And in this case, it was 9 minutes and 30 some odd seconds, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But the entire encounter, I'm sure, was much longer than
Right.
that. And that is something that I think gets lost a little bit. And I'm not making any judgments one way or the other here, but the other arguments are the context of and the challenges of law enforcement and how decisions have to be made in a split second that can look horrible on when replayed on video. And so I think it's compelling evidence. And I think hopefully what the point the judge is making is you need to consider the totality of the video, the circumstances, the testimony, et cetera. But we're certainly all watching, and we're going to see very quickly, I think, what the outcome is going to be. And I think also the judge is probably wanting to avoid there being either a hung jury or a mistrial, and so that they take their time and they actually reach a unanimous verdict.
So, I'm sorry, my dog is barking. It's the only thing about being home and having to do these is like you don't know what's going to happen in your background. So, how was it working as an assistant attorney before you got into ethics?
Right. Well, I was an assistant attorney for local governments for about 25 years. And I worked in for different local agencies in New Mexico. And the one thing that I came to realize was really the broad range of areas that I was allowed to learn and to practice in. So I never imagined that I would get to do constitutional law and environmental law and elections law and really a whole wide spectrum of things, as opposed to just being sort of narrowly focused like a lot of private practitioners are. And, I'm just going to do medical malpractice, or I'm just going to do personal injury or bankruptcy. I really got to experience so many different areas, and areas that I think for me are relevant today because, again, of this focus on our elections. And doing election law, you really learn how an election is conducted, on the ground level. And I mean, this is, where the democracy happens or doesn't. And so I think that, if I look back on the career, I never really did one thing all the time, but I got to do a lot of things during my entire time.
Mm.
And I like that.
When I was in school, environmental law was like the toughest one for me. It was like I could not get into it and it was my last class, and I'm like, this is my last class. I just cannot get into it. I just still didn't really understand it, and it's like I'm like, why do people do this? It was something that I just could not wrap my head in. And so, like, at first, I'm glad I had you as my tutor because you really helped me through school. Are you still tutoring students?
A little bit less so these days. What I'm doing more these days as opposed to tutoring is I volunteer a lot of my time to an organization that places professionals or matches them with different classrooms all across the country who remotely, like we're doing today, and you do presentations to them on a variety of subjects. And so I've done some presentations not only on being an attorney and what that means and what it involves, but also on things like public speaking, debate. And so it's really kind of a cool way of connecting with classrooms and students in a manner that gives them hopefully a different perspective on things. And a lot of places, especially more rural areas, may not have access to a lot of professionals, say in science or engineering and other areas of technology. And so it's a really a cool way of making those connections. And so I'm doing more of that than the tutoring, although occasionally someone will come along and I'll help them out on something. I also do a little bit more mentoring now with
Okay.
newer attorneys and also students who are thinking about going to law school.
Oh, that's good. I think you should keep it up because you're really good at it, and you kind of build a confidence of like hope. Because I know I was struggling, and so when I found you, it just like gave me a lot of hope and confidence in going to school. So I think that you should just continue to just keep up the tutoring and mentoring. So, what would you say is your biggest failure, and what did you learn from it if you had one?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say which was the biggest one. I mean, we all fail at some point in our lives, whether personally or professionally. And I did a presentation this morning to one of our departments, and on one of the last slides in the slide deck, I have this little sort of parting thoughts, and one of them is, if you fail, don't use that as a reason to give up, but rather think of the letters FAIL as standing for first attempt in learning. And so I think that if I had to identify one thing or one attribute, I guess, is that I oftentimes allowed myself to operate too much from a position of fear as opposed to a position of strength. And that's just a failing or in myself that I've had to kind of acknowledge and learn how to overcome. So, we all have our own strengths and weaknesses, and I think that's one of mine.
So, how has an active being an active compliance agent changed your way of thinking on the law?
Um, I think for me, it has really brought home the important point that everything that we do, especially in our professional lives, but especially as attorneys and in any industry, it has an ethical component, an ethical consequence to it. And too many times, I think people tend to ignore that and tend to just completely absolve themselves of making unethical choices. Because there's this myth, I think, that some people carry around with them that, well, only unethical people make unethical choices. And that's not the case. Everybody makes an unethical choice at some point. But if we fool ourselves and if we deceive ourselves into thinking that what we're doing doesn't have an ethical component to begin with, then we start going down this path of continuing to allow ourselves to make unethical choices and still think of ourselves as being ethical. And so many times I think people just focus on either the financial aspects or the personal aspects of, is this going to harm me uh, from a financial standpoint? Am I going to get in trouble? Or is this something I can get away with? And I think nowadays, with all of the attention that's being put upon people and our leaders, especially on the national stage, with regards to these ideas of integrity and humility and empathy, very big word that's being used a lot these days. I think it's really gotten me to refocus on some of these very central principles and the awesome responsibilities that we all carry around with us.
Yeah, that's a lot. I remember when I was in the orientation at the hospital, and they were talking about this a lot. We had to have a whole it was a whole day basically focusing on actors and talking about actical people and the difference and who we would consider as actical and unactical. So it's good that you put it in that perspective because they always put in a box people who are actical or those that's unactical. So I'm glad that you stated that it stated it in that way because it's always so confusing because I was confused in that orientation. All right. So, what advice would you give someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours?
I would think the things I almost always tell anyone, no matter what career they want to pursue, is to really develop your communication skills, both reading and writing and speaking. I think that no matter what area you want to pursue, that's always going to put you a step ahead of those people who haven't developed those skills. And so I guess one of the things I say is if you really want to get into becoming either an attorney or an ethicist, read all you can about this stuff. There's tremendous number of resources out there so that you can start to formulate your own position or theory about these things. And as much education and training that you can get, and again, so many opportunities out there where you don't have to necessarily enroll in a traditional institution. You can take courses online. There's so many training opportunities. In fact, I'm going to do a training next week that's being offered through some group on LinkedIn that involves an area that I work in. And so really grab those types of opportunities that are out there. And also, I would say to try to find someone that you would consider to be either a mentor or a role model who's already gone down that path. And again, I get calls from people occasionally about this stuff. About, well, how do I break into this? And I kind of have to tell them how I got here, but that's not necessarily how they might get there. And again, what I do is a little bit more common with especially big corporations, but it only becomes useful or important if there is that buy-in from management. And so, like the example you gave of, well, we had to do a whole whole day long ethics class, it's like, well, was that something that the organization or the management really bought into, or was that
Hmm.
just a box checking exercise that everybody has to go through
Right.
and then they can forget about it?
Kind of. So it kind of seemed like it was like there's a check off box or something for orientation that
Right.
then it was never talked about like after that or brought up or another meeting like within after being there for so long you have to go back and revisit. It was just for that orientation and then that was basically it.
Yeah, and that's, I think, too common. I mean, where I work, they actually require people to get 2 hours of ethics training through our office every other year.
Mm.
So over the past couple of years, I've trained over 2,000 employees, and that's been for many of them their second or third or fourth time that they've gone through it. But it's really to try to heighten their awareness and bring them back and remind them that this stuff matters. I mean, yes, following the law matters, being financially responsible matters, but doing so in an ethical manner matters as well.
So what have you read or listened to recently that inspired you?
Ah, great question. And I'm gonna pull this up on my iPad just so I get the
Okay.
title correctly, because I've been reading this book recently, and I haven't quite finished with it yet. But I really think it really resonated with me and spoke to a lot of some of the things we're talking about, but also a lot of the things I do in my work. So the title of the book is "Kindness: The Currency of a Civil Society," and it really addresses what the author calls the currency of kindness and how we can incorporate that into our workplaces and our work environments. And it gets into these areas, some of which we've mentioned with regards to empathy and being an active listener and how to actually apply these things. So it's what
Mm.
I'm reading currently, and I think it's a really good resource.
What's the name of it again? I might have to check it out.
I have to look
I like
because
reading
it's a long
positive stuff.
title. Yeah, it's called Kindness, the Currency of a Civil Society. And let me just, the author is Q, just the first initial Q, and I'm going to pronounce it Eunice, Yunus.
Q Eunice.
Yeah,
Q Eunice.
and I know
Probably
it's
have to send
a,
it to me in an email.
okay, yeah, and it's an ebook too, so you don't have to
Oh,
buy the physical copy.
even better. I like even. Do you like audiobooks too? Like, do you listen to like audiobooks, or you like more to like read it yourself?
Oh yeah, I like everything.
Mm.
I got an Audible account, so I like listening to Audible books. Sometimes I'll do both. I'll buy a physical copy and the audio copy,
Hmm.
and kind of have it read to me a little bit as I follow along. Um, but yeah, I love having books around me. That's just how I grew up.
Yeah, me too. More so with the books. I my first audiobook I actually listened to was the Michelle Obama book. Um, and so like I just because I was like, okay, I knew I was busy, and so I knew I wasn't gonna be able to sit down and actually like read the book. And so I was like, oh, they have an audio. And so then I started to get like, oh, okay, I like audiobooks now because like it's so much easier if you can't really while you moving around, you can actually listen to the book at the same time. So I started to get more into audio.
Yeah, well, it really depends on who the narrator is. I mean, a
Yeah.
good narrator can really bring a book to life. Another one you might think about, I haven't gotten around to it yet, but a lot of people really like it. It's by Trevor Noah, and it's called Born a Crime. And I like his stuff. And so
Born a
that one's
Crime. What is it
Born a
about?
Crime. I think it's kind of a semi-biographical account of his life growing up. I think he grew up in South Africa.
Mm.
Um, and during the time of apartheid and all of that. So yeah, I had to Google him real quickly just to make
That's
sure.
okay.
But yeah, he was born in South Africa and in '84, so that would have been
Mm.
right in the heart of apartheid. And so I think his book, because obviously he's also a comedian, is got serious points to it, but done in a comedic fashion. So
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. It's then, and if you reading it to you too, and he's a comedian, so it makes you it more interesting. Okay, so you're
yeah.
gonna have to email me that one too.
Okay.
So, what's the biggest challenge you have with your specific role right now, and how are you planning to overcome it if you have a challenge right now?
Um, I guess the biggest challenge, we've kind of mentioned it already, is just getting people to be willing to start the conversation.
Hmm.
Whether it be not just a matter of whether something is covered by or how the code of conduct that we have would apply to it, but to start the conversation with regards to whether it be a matter of culture, environment. One of the biggest problems that I see in organizations and how they can get on this slippery slope towards not only unethical conduct, but perhaps in legal liability is if there is a culture of what they call fear and silence.
Hmm.
In other words, people are afraid to raise their hand, to even start talking about an issue that they think is occurring in their workplace for fear that they're going to be punished or retaliated against in some other fashion.
Hmm.
And so you have to kind of break that cycle. And because when fear and silence starts to set in and becomes a part of the culture, then that places organizations on a very treacherous path, I think.
I remember when I was working at a hospital, and the charge nurse, she was just almost like a bully, and so she basically we was talking about teamwork because she felt that the CNAs would have to do everything. The nurses really didn't have to do much or whatever. So it was like got into this big back and forth. And so when I eventually had to report her because she was almost like a bully to me. And when after we got into it, I noticed that she took me off the schedule. So I had to go and talk to the manager, the floor manager, and she was telling me like that's not tolerated, zero tolerance. She took you off the schedule. I was like I was afraid to report her because I thought like, and I told her, I said I think that she's never gonna like put me back on to the schedule or whatever because of if you go talk to her and tell her that I talked to you, I'm afraid that she's gonna mess up my schedule. And so it took me a minute to go to her, and then she did take me off the schedule, but then the floor manager had her put me back on it. It was a whole big thing. So it's like it's kind of scary when you're not really sure if you when you're reporting somebody how close they are with the person you're reporting them to and the retaliation you'll get from it.
Right. And something you mentioned there, you talked about the feeling of like you're being bullied. And that's one of the things that I talk about in a different session that I do because we hear that word bullying so often associated with our educational institutions. And the latest iteration being cyberbullying and all of this, but it's really no less of an issue in the workplace. And
Mm-hmm.
and in our world, it really kind of enters more into the workplace violence arena, where someone's
Yeah.
not necessarily being physically attacked, but they're being treated in a way that tends to embarrass or humiliate or demean them. And this is a subject area that a lot of organizations, a lot of HR professionals, a lot of employment lawyers are having to deal with because the psychological trauma of these things is very, very real.
Yeah, it really is. And it is embarrassing too because it's like especially at that time when it got so big when everyone was sitting around a nursing station and she's jumping up and she's like just trying to like show herself and try to belittle me and it does get embarrassing and then like I said it's like you not sure who to report to and then you have all these people around you but they're not standing up for you, and when they know that she's wrong and she's the aggressor but they're not like standing up for you and then you feel like you're kind of like by yourself at that moment and you shouldn't be especially in a workplace.
Right. And I think that's an important point that I try to make in my trainings is, especially when I do like new employee onboarding or orientation, whatever you want to call it, is to make them at least feel as though they don't have to walk alone, that they do have resources and circles of support, as they say, that they can turn to.
Hmm. So, how do you continue to learn in order to stay on top of things within your role?
I learn things every day, I think, and there are a lot of ways that I learn, and I think it's not just learning a new bit of, say, technical information or knowledge, but I also try to learn new ways of relating and interacting with people. And I think that's so important because we can have all the technical skills in the world, but if
Hmm.
we aren't able to articulate our message or our vision and get people to really understand and buy into it as a collective experience, then we're incomplete and we sell ourselves short in that way.
Hmm.
And so I still, I go to lots of webinars and conferences to keep up with the sort of technical side of things because it sounds like I do all these different trainings, and I guess I do because I also do the new employee training on issues revolving around sexual harassment, discrimination, which is, again, if we can all think back pre-pandemic, that was one of the biggest areas of discussion with regards to the emergence of the Me Too movement and, again, the heightened awareness of the high incident rate of these types of behaviors in all sorts of workplaces. And so there's a lot to keep on top of these days, but rightly so. I mean, I
Yeah.
think about it in terms of this. I'm 57 years old, and the
All right.
issues. Yeah.
You don't look 57, Robert.
Well, thank you. But think about this. Uh, Title VII of the Federal Civil Rights Act was
Mm,
adopted in the very same year I was born.
mm,
That was, again, over a half century ago. And yet the issues and that continue to divide us as a people and as a nation are still around. And so I think, yes, having these laws in place are important, but it's really what can we do that's going to tap into and encourage not only the minds, but the heart of people to change their behaviors and
yeah,
change their perspectives because we all have things to learn about this stuff, and certainly I'm no exception there.
yeah.
But I guess on the one hand, I'm sad it's taken this long. On the other hand, I guess I can say, well, it's about time.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
yeah.
didn't mean to go off on
Oh, no, 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 no. It's fine.
soapbox.
It's fine. I mean, I love that you said that. It's definitely it's fine. Everything you said, because it's true. And I didn't even realize it was that long, but yeah, it's a lot of work. It's still a lot of work that needs to be done with that. It's crazy. I think everybody needs some education, more education on it. Um, so you do a lot. You do that. But so with being a lawyer, do you have to like have like like read what can I say? How can I say it? Like maybe like as far as keeping your license or whatever up up to date, do you all have to do like continue education or certain things to be able to keep your license up to date?
Oh, yes. In fact, to keep my license active, even though I'm really not practicing as an attorney much these days, but I still have to go and take 12 hours of continuing education, and two of those hours has to be on ethics,
Mm,
professional ethics for attorneys. So, yeah, that's a requirement I think in pretty much every jurisdiction that we
yeah.
just have to keep up with things. And there's I, I've done it for so long, I still recognize the value and the importance of it, but
Mhm.
I also get a little discouraged or disillusioned sometimes when I see so many attorneys out there in the world behaving in the ways that they do.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Especially like with certain like with public defenders too. Like it seemed like I think I know because they have like such a big load. Like they just kind of dismiss some their clients almost. It's like Some of them don't even know the person's name or really know the case, and it's always a continuance, a continuance, a continuance. So I think in that area, like they should have maybe if they have to take like 12 hours of continuing education, why? I'm trying to like why is there not? It's almost seem like they don't because they have such a big load. They almost don't take their roles. They it's serious enough or something. I'm trying to say it's crazy.
Yeah, and that's, I gotta say that you've hit on a lot of the problems within the system. And being a public defender, I have utmost admiration for them, given all of the things you just mentioned. So when you think about it, it's like, well, yeah, that system should be better. But then it's like, well, how are you going to fund that system? Where's the money going to come from? That's
Right.
going to either increase your staff or your salaries, because those positions generally tend to be some of the lowest paid positions on the scale
Mm,
for attorneys. And so people that make public defense work their career, I have utmost admiration for them, because it is overwhelming. And there are a lot of places now we're seeing across the country where public defenders, and by that I mean the public defender of a district, is saying, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to stop.
mm,
We're going to cap it because of exactly what you said. They're they're just drowning in the number of cases that are out there, and the need is great because of people who cannot afford to hire a private defense attorney. They're entitled to have someone defend them, but they are entitled to have someone defend them competently.
right.
And that's where the challenge lies.
Yeah, it's tough because it's like you can't you gotta rely on this person, but this person got like 1,000 cases and they barely know your name, and it's like
Right.
it's really sad. And so it's like so they need funding to be able to hire more public defenders so they can take the load off of the other ones and split the work, but they have no funding to do that. That's
Well, and if
crazy.
you give them more funding, then what are you taking funding away from?
That's true.
It all
Hmm.
has, it's all connected.
It's horrible. So, what do you plan to do once you retire? Because I know you're talking about retiring.
Yeah, there's so many people ask me that question, and I just think back on, there's so many things that I don't have the time to do now.
Mhm.
I mean, just even things like books and films that I haven't been able to get to. But I think, though, I like to do more writing.
Mhm.
I think both in essays and maybe literature. I'd like to get more into either teaching or training if those kind of opportunities arise. But just sort of generally getting to kind of sit back and relax a little bit and breathe, and maybe just explore some of these things for fun and not
Yeah.
have to feel like I'm relying on them for an income. And then hopefully once we get back to some stage of normalcy, is to do a lot more travel too, because I haven't
Yeah.
traveled in so long, and there's so many places I'd like to go with my wife, internationally and so forth. And so I got a long list, but it's kind of getting to that finish line first.
Have you ever thought about writing a book?
Yes, yes.
Uh,
In fact, I sort of have, in stops and starts, tried to write a book with a co-author who's
mm,
actually a theological professor of ethics in Kentucky.
mm,
And it's been difficult with both of our work schedules, but I've been trying to kind of slowly develop a book on something I call organizational character.
mm,
And, everybody has their own individual character, we know that. But this is really about how you assess the character of an organization and how you can improve it. And by organizations, I don't just mean like businesses or education institutions or governments, but any kind of movement. any type of collection of people who are working towards a common goal, I think a character is going to emerge from that organization. And so it's kind of conceptual at this point, but
Hmm.
yeah, maybe. And it's so much fun these days because you can write something and you don't have to get a big publisher. You
Right.
can make it an ebook or whatever and still get it out there.
So when would it be out? 2 years. When you retire, you can take time and write the book.
Yeah, I don't want to put a timeline to
I'm
it.
giving you a timeline.
I've been working on it now with this other fellow for I don't know how many years, and we keep getting, I guess, just sidetracked because of our other work. And
Yeah.
in fact, I had a conversation with him not too long ago, and this was right after the Breonna Taylor incident, and we started talking. He was asking me questions like, "Well, what would you tell the because the chief of police after that happened resigned and they got a new
Hmm.
chief?" And he said, "Well, what would you tell this new chief of police?" And it's like that's a really hard question.
Hmm.
I mean, I have ideas, but again, there's so many competing interests here, and it's easy to get caught up in just phrases, catchphrases, or slogans. But when it comes to actually doing the work,
Hmm.
it involves, it really involves changing, again, I think, a mindset, a culture, but also bringing in the collective community,
Yeah.
all of the stakeholders, and really having that conversation.
So do you think like as far as the police and their training, do you think they get a lot of like ethical training or having to have these meetings or these seminars, or should they provide more in the in the police with the police, because it just seemed like some of them are unethical, shall I say? So like, well, do you know like how many hours of training hours? Like you say, you all have to do it like every 2 hours every year. Do the police have to have that type of training too, or should they have more of that training?
Well, I can tell you that, to my knowledge, every law enforcement agency has their own, whether they call it code of ethics or code of professionalism, whatever. They all have it. How much training they actually receive on it, I'm not positive. I can say for my organization that I do trainings for all of the new sheriff's cadets that enter
Mm-hmm.
into the academy, and so they at least get it from me at the very beginning. But I guess the thing, and again, it's easy to get caught up in the headlines and the big stories,
Mm-hmm.
but I think law enforcement, just like any other area of practice or of professions, it's going to attract people who want to do the right thing
Right.
and who are concerned about it. But it's also, unfortunately, there are going to be those folks who don't take that seriously, and that's true
Mm-hmm.
of just about any profession
That's true.
out there. The difference, or one of the differentials here, is that um, the those that work in law enforcement, it's such a high consequence, high stake type of work
Mm-hmm.
where people's lives are truly at risk.
Yeah.
And so, if I had all the answers, uh, maybe I would have written the book by now. But it, it's it's so hard to balance all of these things and to do it in a way that you don't appear to be apologizing for one side or the other, but rather to try to be empathetic with all of the different perspectives and sides to this, but also to talk about what does serious reform or change, what does it really look like? And that's the tough nut to crack there, I think.
Yeah. So, what, if anything, keeps you up at night, Robert?
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big question. Um, I think something related to maybe all the issues we've been talking about is I see all of these things that happen in the world, uh, how people are treating one another. And I guess the thing that I think about that maybe keeps me up is how can we be better? How how can we take all of these lessons that we've been given throughout history and how can we truly learn to treat one another with respect and concern and dignity, these very basic things that I think everyone is entitled to. And so I guess those are the things that worry me. And maybe again, after a half century on this planet, I reflect back and just think about, it seems like we should be much further along than we
Yes.
are, maybe.
It's almost like we're going backwards sometimes instead of moving forward, which is crazy because it should be so much different, but it's I guess not. So, what do you work towards in your free time? If you have some free time, you sound like you're very busy.
Yeah.
So, what is it that you work toward when you have free time?
Let's see. I do try to read a lot. I mean, when I have really downtime, I will get into a variety of shows that I can binge watch or so
Mm-hmm.
forth, and on a lot of different platforms. I watch a lot and listen to a lot of British shows and radio dramas and things like that. And um, I'm always fascinated with the way people tell stories
Mm-hmm.
because we all have our own narratives. We all have our own stories, but how we present those and how they are presented well to do, the three things they the three E's, if you will, for all speakers or performers is, are you able to educate, enlighten, and entertain?
Mm.
And those are big asks sometimes to
It's
try to get
good.
all
Three
three.
E's. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, educate, enlighten, and entertain. But those are things that we can try to strive for.
You
And
might
so,
get like maybe two out of the three.
right, and even that's not too bad,
Yeah.
But yeah, those are the things that I mean. I really do. Uh, when it's a good story, I really get engaged with it because it may give me ideas about how to communicate or tell a story that
Mhm.
may be relevant either to my work or my personal life.
Makes sense. So here's some fun questions. What's the worst advice you were ever given? That's
Oh,
a question that's never really asked. People always ask, "What's the best advice? What is the worst advice someone ever given you?"
um, gosh. And I'm certain I've been given lots of terrible advice. I'm just trying to think of one. um, boy, you may have stumped me with that one.
I
Just,
know. I have these surprise questions.
yeah. Oh boy. I
We'll come back to
okay. Yeah. Right.
it.
This is the lightning round. So
So, okay, so say we finish the interview and you step outside your house and you find a lottery ticket that ends up winning $10 million. What would you do with that $10 million?
uh, wow. Well, that was probably easy because I think I already kind of answered. Yeah, retire right away. um, uh, Make a plan, get a budget, figure out how long it's going to last. Think maybe about do I want to relocate? Is there another place I haven't been yet or would want to live in? If we weren't in sort of pandemic situation, I would think about how do I get a how do I get a flight to Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, uh, Europe.
You just
Um,
travel.
yeah, just travel. I mean, it's I guess, when you think about getting that kind of windfall and just that kind of amount of money falling in your lap, I
Mm-hmm.
think you want to. I think most people think, well, it's going to give me a lot of freedom,
Mm-hmm.
and it might. I mean, it very well might. I just think it depends on how you use it, and I still think there's this obligation for all of us when we have either wealth or gifts of other sorts to also give back,
Yeah.
to make those contributions in whatever ways that we can.
Yeah, that's absolutely that's the topic we talked about the other day about how we, when you get such a large amount of money, you become such a prominent person. Should you give back, or are you held accountable for giving back into the community, or helping people, homeless people, and putting up things like that. $2 million, it helps people.
Yeah,
Definitely
yeah,
give back.
you can do a lot of good with that.
So, what's the worst advice you were ever given?
Um, Goodness, I don't know. Believe everything you hear, or believe everything you read. But actually, that is kind of something that I think about now more, as maybe as I've gotten older and so forth, is that we should always be looking at things with a critical eye, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
because even I don't even give the news media, any news media source, a free pass here,
Yeah.
because they all have other interests at heart, whether it be a social or a political interest or a commercial interest, just to
Mm-hmm.
increase their readership or viewership. And so, we need to not just accept everything that is presented to us. We need to think critically about these things.
So everything on the internet isn't true. So
Um, Other than those lottery numbers,
I
I
remember that
believe those.
commercial. The commercial where they was like, everything on the internet is true. Or whatever. Believe everything on the internet. Like,
Well, I'm surprised over the past year with so many people, having to work remotely or having maybe a little bit more time, how we just haven't finished the internet. That we
right.
just haven't seen every page now, and so you can go on and do something else.
The internet is very big. Social media is very big. Um,
Oh, I got
so
another answer to
Robert.
your question about what I'm going to do in retirement. Just
Oh,
real quick,
yeah. Uh
maybe I'll
huh.
start a podcast.
Yes, that'd be great.
I don't know what it'd be about because there's so many podcasts out there, but yeah, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll start a podcast.
I think that'd be great. That'd be a good idea, especially with what you do too. Like your podcast would be awesome. I think you should start a podcast. And you can just sit down and just talk to yourself all day, and
Yeah, I think I
just
do
have.
enough of that already.
And you can have your wife join in from time to time on your podcast. I know some podcasts is actually couples that do them together, and they just talk about like different things, have different topics
Right.
every day. So
Well,
that'd be great.
my wife is a scientist.
Oh,
She's not an attorney, and so one of the things that we've kind of contemplated in retirement is maybe doing things to help improve the communication skills of scientists and engineers.
mm,
Because, yeah, again, these are people that are highly credentialed, have a lot of technical knowledge, but can't always express themselves in
right.
the most effective ways.
Oh, she's a scientist. I should have interviewed her. No,
Probably.
like that's awesome. I never met a scientist before. I guess a science teacher, right? But not, not a scientist. That's awesome. Um, so if someone wants to get in touch with you out in your area where you are, if they need mentorship, if they need any advice or whatever, how can they reach you?
Um, that's a great question. I mean, I guess, do you want me to give out my give out an email or
Yeah,
what?
email, social media platforms, however
Yeah.
you get people get in
Well,
contact with you.
you can email me at rdkiddjr, that's rdkiddjr at gmail.com. Um, I do, I'm social media, I'm on it, but not to really post so much.
Hmm.
So probably the email's the best way um, to get in touch, and or they can get in touch with you.
Thanks. So yeah,
And
maybe hook me up with Robert. I can get in touch.
yeah, it's I the again Twitter at rdkiddjr. But again, I don't really spend a whole lot of time on social media for probably a variety of reasons. Tends to get people in trouble more than it helps them, I
Yeah,
think.
it really do. And then you get like all these crazy inboxes and stuff, and that has no relation to what you do, and people trying to sell you stuff, and yeah, this is hard, especially on Instagram. You get so many people trying to sell you everything,
Yeah,
and I'm like, it has nothing to do with what I do, but you just decided you was gonna shoot your shot in my inbox
yeah.
and
And
fill up
and
my inbox.
just so you know, if I get a bunch of trolls and stuff there, I'll just shut that account down. So I don't have time for that. No, nor does
Yeah.
anybody else.
Well, we're going to stick with your email then. So,
Okay.
rtkidjr@gmail.com to reach you. I just want to say again, thank you so much for doing this, taking time out of your day to do this. You didn't have to. So, I really appreciate it. And I'm glad that I got to talk to you again after all these years. I know we email each other back and forth, but to actually be able to talk to you is great. So, thank you again.
Well, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great time to reconnect a little bit to talk about some of these things that
Hmm.
I'm interested in, and I think it helps build these bridges
Yeah.
between people. And people can think about bridges as the physical thing, but it's also relationships and
Yes.
means of exchange and interaction. And so I always like to take advantage of those opportunities.
Oh, cool. Maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Well, I
Maybe
hope
go,
so.
especially when you write your book, it's and do your
Well, then
podcast.
I'll need a lot of promotion at that point.
Oh yeah, it's true. And for your podcast too. And you don't have to wait till retirement to do your podcast.
Yeah, I need someone to help me more on the technical side of things. It's not that I ever have a problem talking, but I need someone who can do the editing and
Right.
all that good
That's
stuff.
what I'm in school for. You
Yeah.
tutored me. I can tutor you. Well, again, thank you. And I just want to thank everybody for watching, if you're watching. And Robert, hope to talk to you soon.
Uh, Take care. Be
You
safe.
too.
Be well. And yes, I hope we get to talk again very, very soon.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Take
Bye
care.
bye.